Hello and welcome to the Herald's Innovation for Recovery webinar series. I'm Kim McAllister and I'm really pleased to be joined today by three financial services experts. We have Stuart Chalmers, who's Managing Director, Scotland Financial Services Lead at Accenture. We have Gary Taylor, Managing Director, Digital Workplace Lead, Financial Services, Accenture, and Helen Lindsay, she's the Senior Manager, Scotland Human Potential Talent and Organisation Lead, also from Accenture. So hello everyone.
Hello, Kim.
Hi.
Hi. So today we're going to discuss the pace of change in Scotland's financial services sector and the impact that that's had on people and jobs, because we're meeting in mid-December. We're 9 months into the pandemic and things that should have taken 3 years have been squeezed into 3 months as we all adapt to this new working life that we have. We're making more transactions online. We're not using cash. We've got different credit schemes. Business owners have taken on all sorts of loans to keep companies afloat. And these have been through fast track systems. And of course, we've all moved to home working and there's been demands for all sorts of new skill sets. So we're just going to chat through all the various facets of this. And the first thing that I want to ask is, can we have an overview? What have been the best things that have happened in terms of reacting quickly? So Gary, I'll ask you first.
Okay, so from a technology perspective, it's quite interesting because actually financial services organisations within Scotland and also kind of Accenture as a whole did react very quickly. We moved 80,000 PCs to people's homes in the space of a week in order to enable remote workers to support our client base, which is incredible. You just think about those stats and the ability to do that when servicing regulated clients. You look at how people embrace the technology as well. I mean, in the space of a month, we went from 14 million video minutes to 64 million video minutes. And it's just to say, you know, before you can get people on video when they were having calls. And now actually everybody's very comfortable with that. And the technology has shown that we can support home working. It'll be interesting when we come to a hybrid model and start to have this blend between, you know, 2 to 3 days at home and then 2 days in the office, which is the balance I think I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's the next challenge. Helen, what have you seen from your side of things?
So I think we've seen a lot of change. Obviously, as you say, a lot of things have dramatically happened. We've had a lot of clients probably historically that have talked about wanting to be more digital and talked about wanting to have more change and more flexibility and different models of ways of working. But actually, COVID has forced their hands and they've had to do it and they've had to adapt very, very quickly. So I think it's almost effectively allowed people to very quickly be forced, but they've actually proven that a lot of the things that we talked about and a lot of the ideas that we talked with clients and helped to think about with them actually have come to life. They've come to fruition. You know, for example, people being allowed to work from home. You know, historically, that wouldn't actually happen across multitude of industries in such a short space of time. So it's definitely, that's a positive angle. You know, we've tested something very, very quickly.
And I think just moving to work from home has been the biggest challenge for everyone. Gary, would you add anything to that?
I think people have realised quite quickly, right, that we all have family lives, and actually the distraction, the dog or the child, in that first week when, you know, the schools were out as well, I think that almost set this model where it became acceptable for distractions. And then as the children went back to school and there were less distractions, people were kind of used to it, I guess. But it's been a challenge, right? The human-centric side of it is really important, and that connection, I think that a lot of people are kind of striving, and that's why I think the office isn't gone yet, and we'll see a return to the office in the spring, I hope.
Stuart, you've worked in the company for 20 years. How can you summarise the difference that you've seen even just this year?
Well, I think the company has been incredibly different. I think, actually, interestingly, working in Scotland for a company that's a global company, what we found is everyone's become the same boat. The folk who've maybe been down in London, who've traditionally been in London all the time, sitting in an office of however many thousand people, suddenly working from home. We've all been on the same Teams calls or Zoom calls or Skype calls, which has been different. And I think that's been, to an extent, that's leveled set a lot of people and a lot of organisations. We've kind of realised that actually that adaptation that maybe people have been working remotely or working in different bits of the UK, maybe particularly in financial services, the way we've maybe had to adapt previously, that adaptation has been done by an awful lot of people, and I think we've seen that in our clients as well as within Accenture, which I think is quite interesting.
One of the biggest concerns, I think, for everyone has been moving to different technology and therefore the security element. Has that been a concern?
Yeah, and it's actually evident in the marketplace as well. We're seeing an increase in cyber attacks. And if you look at the fact that we've now got people working from home, contact centers, for example, in financial services, very quickly, the technology enabled them to, take calls, do that from, in many cases, their bedrooms or shared apartments. Now got physical security risk. Actually, who is it that sat next to them listening into the details? No longer control that environment. And we've seen a lot more targeting around kind of phishing scams and everything else as a result through COVID, as some of the elderly generations start to move to more digital banking and everything else. They've been a prime target during this time.
I mean, I think that security point is critical for financial services, for banks and insurance companies in particular. It's interesting. Again, it drives not just necessarily kind of financial services in Scotland, but a global kind of question. If you can work remotely, that's great. What does that mean from a security perspective? Are there locations that are more secure than others, whether that's geographical or whether that's kind of physical where people are? And that is absolutely something that we're having a lot of conversations with our banks, partially from the services that Accenture provides to banks, but more generally, as Gary says, or just the way that they organise and run their business. How do you deal with those different security considerations on potentially more personal devices, bring your own devices? Not everybody's been given a company-owned machine, potentially with children and with people in the background, and potentially in shared accommodation, and all those kind of those considerations are absolutely right at the heart of, I think, of all financial services organisations are looking to see what does the future look like beyond COVID.
One of the things that surprised me actually during COVID was that actually for some of our clients we were seeing hotel accommodation being rented out because actually they needed people in secure spaces. And who would have kind of thought that would happen, right? While offices were closed, we're going to start renting hotel rooms during the day in order that we can have secure conversations without kind of prying ears. And you look at that conversely to the WeWork in New York, you've actually seen an increase in their monthly subscriptions because people need to get out of the office and back into an office type environment for that kind of human connectivity.
I think the only other thing I would add to it, though, is we can't assume that what our own individual journeys have been through this pandemic in terms of being able to work from home applies to everybody within the financial services context. So there are a number of individual groups of people who will, as Stuart said, be in their bathroom corridor in shared living accommodation, who don't have the most secure internet access. We're making assumptions, and we have to make sure that we're recognizing when we're talking to our clients that one size doesn't fit all in this. And so it's not going to be, just a cookie cutter recipe of how we go back to, some sort of new normal. It's not going to be, what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for the person that they sat next to previously in a contact center.
That's hard though, isn't it? That human element that people didn't necessarily think about before. How have you been advising people to deal with that? I
think it does come down to that one size does not fit all. What you do for one particular group of individuals. What we're seeing, we did a lot of research in COVID, and we surveyed, I think it was about 3,000 different CXOs and another 15,000 workers across 15 different industries, including banking and insurance. And what we were looking at was not necessarily the net promoter score in terms of what you do for your customers, but actually what the employees needed. And there's a number of different factors, but a lot of it is about developing the right skills, giving them access to the future focused skills for employability. It's the financial support, it's the mental health, it's the emotional, relational connection. It's enabling people in these circumstances that we're spending a lot of time on calls, but Stuart, Gary, myself are used to that. Individuals who are not necessarily used to that type of activity, if they've been front facing in a branch before, suddenly they're serving customers in a different way. How do they still feel connected to the person that used to sit or used to be in the branch with them? How do they still feel part of their kind of community and feel the culture of the organization that they sit in? So it's not an easy thing, but I think it's very different for each different bank and each different insurance or capital markets organization that we're working with.
I think I'll just add one thing I would add to that is absolutely we're seeing all FS organisations think about what this looks like and what the model looks like. What does the business model look like? What does the kind of the staff model look like? But at heart, we still remain in quite a challenging economic situation. And a lot of these organisations continue to have pretty challenged economics. And certainly, if we could all read the results of all the FS organisations, there continues to be a significant drive to take cost out. And taking cost out, sure, there's an element there of, well, maybe I can shut some expensive real estate in London and shut an office here and close a contract and people work from home. But the additional and incremental cost that's been added, firstly, to just transform your business to be able to deal with that, but then the ongoing running costs, I don't think that's quite played its way through yet. So there's this kind of challenge between absolutely needing to respond to what people need and what customers need, and banks and insurance and FS has to do that in Scotland and everywhere. But there's still this fundamental challenge that banks are trying to take significant cost out of their bottom line. And kind of doing those two things together is going to be a challenge over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years.
Well, and Stuart, that presents an opportunity for Scotland, does it not, in terms of actually that move out of London? Because they've got to move somewhere.
That's true. Well, I was just going to say the next thing. I mean, there's kind of, it's almost like a grieving process. There's the initial, oh my goodness, we need to do something about this. Then there's the bedding in. Oh, okay, we can do this. We're okay. And now we're like 9 months down the line, and we're starting to see these kind of longer term effects. So many businesses have taken loans. So many individuals have taken mortgage holidays. People have done what they've needed to do. When do you think we're going to start to see the consequences of that? And do you think that's going to become a problem?
It's going to be a significant issue. Across, actually, we talk about this across Europe and across the globe. Different countries will deal with it in different ways, and it will impact in different places. But absolutely, clearly in the UK, because the government support has been extended a little bit further, because furlough schemes have gone a little bit further, because the repayments for the loans have gone a little bit further out, it's not hit yet, frankly. So we have this kind of somewhat false situation where we kind of go, it's not felt quite bad. And we do a lot of work with the World Economic Forum, and we're kind of beginning to see this K-shaped recovery happening as well, with some businesses doing well, some businesses not doing so well, sometimes even in the same sector. The obvious thing is kind of, online retailers and non-online retailers. So you might be a shop, but it depends what sort of shop. But what we've not yet really seen is those people who are really struggling, whether it's individuals or businesses, that's not yet played its way through into the economy. And we know that all the banks are looking at that. Clearly, there's been significant provisions being put into results for deferrals and for payments not coming back, for loans not coming back. Clearly, there's a number of banks looking and saying, well, it's okay because the UK government is guaranteed a lot of this lending, so we'll do it best we can. But Rishi Sunak's going to pay up, and that'll be all right. We've yet to see that kind of play through into reality. We've yet to see exactly how that works. We've yet to see exactly what that looks like when businesses can't pay back, won't pay back. In some cases, clearly there's fraud in the system. Clearly there's businesses that probably don't exist that took that money in the first place. And we've yet to see that play through. I think we're going to begin to see that. It's probably going to be more into Q2, Q3 in 2021. But I think that's going to be a big story in 2021 and as we go into 2022. The other thing we're seeing as well is banks really beginning to think about, well, how do I deal with people in that situation? How do I deal with businesses in that situation? We have the Scotland example of RBS and the GRG unit, the restructuring unit that probably wasn't seen, certainly from a PR perspective, is the greatest story. Now, clearly there will be stories, and there'll be, I won't necessarily take a view on that, but for sure, banks are going to be looking at that experience and going, we have to be seen to be supporting businesses and supporting customers. How they do that, again, and I did bring it back in the context of cost reduction, the context of needing to continue to kind of show shareholder return. It's going to be fascinating, but that is going to be a focus in 2021.
Gary, did you want to add to that?
No additionals to kind of the financial view. I think slight personal view on that. I'm actually quite hopeful in spring that we'll see a bounce back, actually, because I think it's unprecedented, as Stuart said, and I'm of the view that actually we don't quite know how we're going to react to this as a global economy. We might see something very different in spring.
I think anecdotally, I would say the bounce back loans that have gone out, I think very few of them have been used so far to bounce back. The good news is actually when you look at it, a lot of that bounce back loans is actually sitting in the current account, sitting in the account, so it's not being used for anything yet. So there is actually kind of liquidity and cash sitting in the system for businesses to do something. They were kind of, essentially it was a free loan, right? Take the money out, and why not? We'll see what happens with that next year. That's not going to be the problem for the paying back. But there's challenges in the system that are to come, I think.
And a lot of people have spoken about taking it so that they've got it, and then, as you say, using it as a kind of almost like a comfort blanket, allowing them that little bit of wiggle room so that they can plan ahead, because we've not been able to plan beyond a couple of months, have we? Because we've just not known. Now we've obviously got the vaccine coming in. People are starting to feel a little bit more confident. So could it be that all these loans just suddenly get paid back and there's a massive, amount of money in the system? Is that maybe a possibility?
It's feasible, but actually you don't want them necessarily paid back in that sense, right? We want to invest them to kind of create jobs and to create kind of new services, and for businesses to be able to kind of thrive and grow, and for individuals as well who've kind of taken the payment holidays, the mortgage holidays. Your mortgage is still there, but hopefully that's kind of given people the 3 months or the 6 months or the 9 months of breathing space. I guess we need to kind of see how it plays through into employment, and a rise in employment, obviously from a business perspective, into the retail economy, plays into insurance as well. I think am I as optimistic as Gary? I think I'm cautiously optimistic that the economy will survive, right? We will move forward, but I think there are shocks to come in the system. I think you're right, Kim. It's a question of how significant, or how can we manage them in the best sense, from a UK perspective.
And Helen, from a personal point of view, we've all had to think about our spending habits and our savings and our rainy day fund that maybe some people just hadn't even had to come up against quite so sharply before. Have you seen examples, or have you seen maybe some evidence of people changing their savings and spending habits?
I think, to be honest, I'd say people that I'm encountering are being probably more cautious rather than, kind of, I guess, reckless or initially just frivolous and throwing cash around. I think a lot more people are cautious. But I would probably defer to Stuart in terms of his perspective, as FS lead in this.
I think that's right. I think, again, it goes back to, there's certainly evidence when you kind of look at the money that's been borrowed, either from individuals or businesses, and the amount of that money that's still sitting in the system. There's clearly people have been cautious. I don't think it's been a splurge. I think necessarily, what do you splurge on, right, when you're sitting in lockdown? But I think it's a question of what happens with that money next year. Is it still there? Is it used just to pay off debt, and is it used just to kind of keep people employed? Isn't it used just to kind of keep businesses ticking over? The question, I think, there is an interesting question of how does the recovery begin to hit individual businesses from a Scottish perspective. Clearly, if you look where we're, what we rely on, financial services, sure, but then kind of tourism and other kind of significant industries, it will be interesting to see how they recover. That clearly is dependent on the vaccine. It's dependent on so many things that we're all just kind of looking and hoping for, right? But I think it's too early to say. The money's still there. There's in the system. How will it support people and businesses next year? And how will they be paid back? And are there defaults? And does that lead to business failures? Does that lead to unemployment? There's a course that looks quite horrible and quite difficult. But then there's a course that, the Gary, the glass half full, what the business will recover. Fundamentally, we're still quite a sound economy. Fundamentally, other industries are rising up. There will be winners and there will be losers. That K-shaped recovery will probably happen.
It's interesting, as I look out my window here in Edinburgh, I think a lot of people, as they come back into the city, having kind of not been in here for work, will come into a different skyline. Construction continues. Right? We've got buildings, sites going up all over the city, and financial services firms have signed 20-year leases, taking up 280,000 square foot of office space at Haymarket. So there is still some confidence within the economy.
That's really good to hear. And what about the role of data? Because that's something that Scotland's particularly good at, is data science and using data, especially in sort of crazy times like this. Has there been a surge in the use of data or new ways of using data to support your clients?
What's happening with data? There's multiple things that we've seen in the last year that accelerated it. Clearly, it's around to an extent kind of contact centres. Let's use contact centres as an example, and kind of chatbots and assisted support for customers to enable you to have better, quicker, faster conversations, understand what's happening with your financial situation, rather than kind of staying on hold to a contact centre or having to go into a branch. Actually, all that's been driven by data underneath, right? It's banks and insurance companies better using the data to be able to service queries and help customers understand what they need to do more. If you look at the role of kind of automation and which is helping us do things faster and better. And frankly, the reason that all those business loans and all those mortgage payments were able to happen was because of automation. It wasn't because people suddenly hired 2,000 people. to be able to kind of process all the work. It was robots, and it was automation, and it was data that enabled the money to go out to customers, the money to go out to businesses, the mortgage payments to happen. So data clearly data is a huge impact in financial services. It's almost a cliche to talk about it. I think the point came around Scotland. Again, Scotland's a really interesting one. We absolutely are aiming to be the data capital of Europe, right? I mean, that's what we should be. The skills that are here, the capability that we've got here in Scotland, in Edinburgh and Glasgow, up in throughout the Central Belt, but up in the North East as well. There are huge skills, there's huge capabilities here. And we're seeing our clients begin to move here, banking clients as well as people like Amazon and some of kind of like the big tech firms coming to Scotland because of the infrastructure that's been built up here around with data. I think that's a huge opportunity for financial services in Scotland, to really be something differentiating, to really be something new and exciting in next year in 22 and 23, 24 and beyond.
Yeah.
And I think just to add, Kim, I would say that there's a lot of our clients are also investing in terms of the skills and the key skills that they're building, often anchor around data. So thinking about the analytics side, the insights, telling the story, understanding what insights are coming from a chatbot, and understanding what the data means, and being able to potentially engage with a customer, potentially tweak a product, tweak channels, etc. But it's definitely a lot of investment and focus around building that data skill set and capability within a lot of the AFS organisations.
So I think I'll just add to that. One thing that's quite interesting is how that's changing the jobs and the roles that exist in some of the areas of Scotland as well. So we're talking about kind of contact centres in particular. Clearly, there's an awful lot of contact centres up in Scotland. As the role of the contact agent changes a little bit, because it's less just on the phone, because some chatbot or something else is kind of taken away some of that volume, which helps banks from a cost perspective. What we're seeing is a lot of banks begin to think about, well, how do I use the skills of those people? It's not necessarily just a cost reduction. And there's these kind of new roles come up that my mum doesn't know what it is, and probably I don't either, like things like knowledge engineers, which is about people who are, exactly to Helen's point, who are kind of taking the insight that's coming from the system. They understand how banks operate. These are people working in contact centres, operation centres for a long time. They understand how banks work. They can then interpret the data, and they can tune the robots and tune the kind of the tools that are there. This kind of idea of low code, no code kind of type things is quite a big thing at the moment in FS. How do you get people who are not deep technologies experts to do things with technology that's really valuable? And we're definitely, I think, beginning to see a bit of a trend and a bit of movement towards those kind of operational people, those contact center people, as the need for them to be on the phone reduces. Well, what do they do next? And actually, they can do far more interesting things and far more valuable things with the skills and knowledge that they've got, with a little bit of retraining. I think we'll see more of that as well.
Definitely, it's not necessarily, I don't disagree with the fact that the cost reduction thing is definitely still key, but this is now not necessarily about replacing people with robots or replacing people with tech. It's about the human plus machine. So where do you give people the ability to work with the machines and understand and have the right skill sets to work in parallel and partnership with them, and dictate the way that they want the machine to work and have the machine work for them? So it's not necessarily about getting rid of a key number of people, and it's about actually reskilling them, which goes back again to that research. It's about leaving people net better off. It's about responsible reskilling. It's not about solely reduction, exit. It's actually more about how do we enable people to build the right skills. They're not necessarily the folk that will go back to university to do a data science degree, but actually they can learn the data skills, they can learn the analytics skills, they can learn key tech skills. We've done it ourselves within Accenture. We've done it to 300,000 plus individuals. We didn't lose people in that cycle of activity. We reskilled people. We redeployed them with new skills that, frankly, is marketable, right? And that's what's important for these FS organisations, especially in Scotland. As Stuart says, we've got that history and context around data analytics, etc. We've got organisations coming to on that basis. So these banks, these FS organisations are also now investing in that way too.
And Gary, what does that mean? Yeah, what does that mean for how they work and where they work? They don't need to be in Edinburgh, Glasgow, the main centres, if they're doing all this online, do they?
So actually, they still need to be within the UK in terms of some of the laws that we've got in terms of where certain things can be processed from. I think that's where the opportunity. I mean, Stuart talked to it a little bit earlier on about kind of a potential exodus from London. That's quite exciting, right? Where do they go? They head up to our Scottish cities because of what they've got to offer, and the fact that we've got countryside on our doorstep. Is that what people are looking for now? and maybe London's not, the big draw it used to be in this current environment. But to come back to your question around data, and actually linking that with security as well. From a financial services perspective, in what we're seeing from a security perspective, actually that data becomes very important in order that the artificial intelligence can kind of be run over that data, take it into context, and then identify, is this a fraudulent transaction? Because actually Gary's, sat at his home in Edinburgh, but there's transactions going on, down south, and we can put those things together because we understand that from his mobile phone, where the transaction's happening, and so interesting times at the moment, and how that data can be used for your own protection, which is really the robots working with the end consumer.
So do you think Scotland has an opportunity here then, given that, people maybe do want to think about a better lifestyle alongside this new way of working?
Sure, you were talking to this earlier on.
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think it's interesting, isn't it? A year ago, we were looking at kind of 20,000 jobs coming into Glasgow from Barclays, and JP Morgan kind of committing again, and Virgin Money kind of opening the new big office with 10,000 people there, and all these sort of things. And some of that, feels a little bit kind of more fragile. To your point, Kim, it's kind of, well, if you don't need to be in Scotland, if you don't need to be in London, but you can be anywhere, why do you need to be in Scotland at all? Why do you need to be in these big offices? I think we've got the opportunity, one, around the skills, and I think there's an element there of leading the way and reskilling in the new world, and we've kind of almost been forced into it a little bit by COVID, but it's an opportunity. I think there's definitely something around the investment and the inward investment in Scotland and the desire to be in Scotland. I think there's an opportunity there. And then I think we've got an opportunity to kind of lead the way. Actually, there is a lot of, frankly, think about all these offices that are being set up. Well, there's an opportunity there to set them up in an entirely different way. It's not actually, refitting things that exist already. If you're doing it anyway, we'll do it in a COVID secure way, or whatever the next COVID is, heaven forbid that might happen. So I think we've got an opportunity to lead the way, because we're kind of, to some extent, particularly over in Glasgow, at the start, or building a much more significant infrastructure already. So if we do that in the right way, we then have all the kind of the benefits of, we've all chosen to live in Scotland, right? The benefits of living in Scotland, as well as kind of a highly skilled, highly educated workforce who truly understand financial services, alongside the need for cost reduction that all of the FS firms are looking at. I think there's a huge opportunity for Scotland and the northwest and the northeast of England and other kind of regional areas. I think we need to kind of grasp that opportunity, but I think it's absolutely there.
I think also I'd add to that, Stuart, is the opportunities there not just to attract talent that perhaps would be the operations, the back office, the contact centre. It's now an opportunity as well, if we don't have to be London centric in terms of some of the financial services organisations, then it's talent at all ends of the scales. It's from C-suite level all the way through. It doesn't necessarily have to be the hundreds and thousands of individuals. It doesn't have to be the contact centre individuals that we're solely sourcing talent for within Scotland. Actually, it's all levels.
Well, that leads me on nicely to the last question that I wanted to put to you, which is all about trust and leadership. Because now that we are all working from home and we've all kind of bedded in a little bit, are people working as hard? Are they working too hard? Have we got that balance yet of, all the sort of monitoring and the leadership that goes along with it to make sure that people are still fulfilling their roles in a way that they're happy with, in a way that's good for their mental health? Have we adjusted yet? Do we still have some work to do around the support around that?
Well, I think we've seen this in the Accenture's perspective, that you're not really working from home, you're living at work, is what it feels like a little bit, right? And that's a problem. There's no question about that. That we probably all, I certainly have kind of probably not quite got that adjustment quite right all the time over the last 9 months, 12 months. And I think we just kind of recognise and understand how does it change, right? You can't just come on, if you're lucky enough to have a spare room, but to come into the spare room and sit in the spare room at 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, and with 30 minutes. We need to find a way, I think, to manage that adjustment a little bit. I think the trust thing's really important as well, that there is still that feeling almost, I think we've seen it to an extent within Accenture, that needs to almost prove that you're present even more because you're not in the office. So you definitely are on that Teams call or that Zoom call or that whatever software you're using kind of call. You're definitely there, you're definitely present, you're definitely proving to be there. And I think that's a cultural change that we probably need to kind of instill, and we're certainly trying to provide that within Accenture. That's definitely something we're keen to promote. There isn't the need to necessarily be there, right? If it makes sense to go out and walk around for a couple of hours in the day or an hour in the day, well, you need to do that. But it's hard. And I think that does come from the top. I think that is a leadership thing, to show compassion, to show empathy, to understand that people have, back to Helen's point, have very different working or living positions, and so kind of showing that compassion, showing that empathy, providing support, whether it's kind of technical support, the right laptop and the right desk chair and all that sort of thing, or whether it is just allowing people and understanding that people won't always be on. I think we've got a way to go in that. I think maybe, Accenture, we're quite a virtual firm anyway. We're probably been quite lucky with that, but even if I don't think we've got it absolutely right. So I kind of suggest that probably most firms have got a way to go on it. I think that's something we're going to have to work hard on.
Helen, what's your experience of it?
Yeah, no, I was just listening to what Stuart was saying and kind of nodding along, feeling very, very similarly, that it's, from an individual perspective, it's very hard and very tiring to be constantly on from, 8 till whenever, right? Personal experience. I think for the people that I particularly collaborate with, whether it's levels above, levels below, same equivalent levels, and clients, it's probably about setting boundaries and recognizing, as Stuart says, where are the calls that actually I can be walking and talking? Where do I have to be sat in front of the laptops, sharing slides, or demonstrating something, or kind of, I guess, prototyping, working together on something. I think, though, we've all, no matter where we're at, whether we're frontline banking employees or in a back office or in an organization like where we work, we've all adapted, we've all responded. But I'm very, very aware of the fact that it's now becoming a bit of fatigue, right? I think there was probably an impression or a perspective that we would do this for a short period of time. We're now 9 months plus in, and I think there's fatigue about family circumstance, fatigue about seeing friends, fatigue about being able to socialize, restrictions, financial concerns, and that's in an individual basis. That's before you factor in the fatigue about being online all of the time. So I think we're seeing a lot more of clients wanting to talk to us about the different types of programs that they can run. How can they listen to their employees? How can we use the data, the insights, the technology to enable like a 360 feedback loop, not about performance necessarily, but about what employees need, so that if you're creating a well-being program, it's not just something that's token that lasts for 6 weeks. It's actually listening to employees, it's actually hearing what they need, and also doing that probably on an individual basis. So what I would need would not necessarily be the same as what Gary might need or what Stuart might need at the same point in time. Equally, there might be teams that need support together, but I think we need to reflect that the individual is going through this on multiple different facets. It's affecting from family all the way through to work life. So I don't think we're necessarily perfect. I don't think that it's a done, signed and sealed journey and it's over and it's in the past. I think it's right now, and we have to be acutely aware of it. And I think it's being recognized by our clients. I think more and more of them are looking for support about how do they listen to what the employee need is. It's not just about skills, it's about what they need in this moment and where the support is. And I think finally, I would also say it's about that connection. We talk a lot about the kind of water cooler feeling, the coffee conversation, that kind of connection. A number of people that I speak to internally and externally are struggling with that. They really enjoy that interaction. They really enjoy the break away from whatever is going on at home and their flat share circumstance or whatever it might be. So they're missing that. Others are loving being at home and the flexibility to be able to keep on top of domestic life as well as juggle work. So I think it's very clear that we're not there yet, but we just need to help internally for us and also with clients navigate what is a very complex landscape.
Yeah, I think we're all learning, aren't we? And we're all learning from each other, which is really nice. I think a lot of people are sharing, this worked in my company, this might work in your company, and realizing that we're all in this together. I think my favorite part was when I spoke to a chief executive and he turned around and he had a baby on a papoose on his back. Well, he was chatting to me and I just thought, this is wonderful. It just shows how we're all human and we're all dealing with all these various pressures that we have.
But to me, that's a big change, right? That's a big change. Having worked at home on various occasions, prior to COVID, you would be really anxious about having to say, listen, I have to drop 5, I've got to go and do X, or I'm sorry about a child coming through or the dog barking. And now it's kind of, as Stuart said, it's sort of put us all on a level playing field, that when we're in this kind of environment, a level playing field, that actually it's okay. It's okay to show that I am a different rounded person to the other person I may be talking to. My circumstances are different, but actually it's okay to show that I'm a parent, I'm juggling other things, you know, and that's the human side, which I think has definitely been a positive.
So just to conclude then, we've covered so much in the 40 minutes. I want to look forward. So if you wouldn't mind just getting your crystal ball out so that we can all feel a little bit more secure about the future. Given that we are 9 months in and hopefully we've learned something so far, what would you suggest are the priorities for the next, well, let's say 6 months. Let's not look too far ahead. Gary, what would you say?
I think the next 6 months is get through Christmas, right? And the dark winters up here, whilst keeping your sanity. And I think, we've learned a lot through COVID as we went through it. I think we're all kind of settling into that way of working, despite being tired and that fatigue that Helen spoke of. But actually, the end's in sight. I'm going to take my optimistic view. Spring is around the corner. I'm expecting some fresh shoots. At that point, I'm expecting a new model, a new way of working that we're going to have to adapt to. And it's not going to be like the old way, and it's not going to be like how we're working today. It's going to be this hybrid model that sits in between. That is more accepting that people have got, lives outside of work. It's going to take into account that actually for some people, they want to work from home. Some people need to be in the office. And we're going to get this model where people get to work as individuals from the environments they want to work from. And then when we're needing to come together as teams, then we'll go back into office spaces and we'll connect as human beings again. And that's what I'm looking forward to in the spring.
I like that. Stuart, what would you suggest for the next 6 months?
Well, I'm going to be positive as well. So, I think we've got a great opportunity, Accenture and FS in Scotland more generally, to we're past, I think, the bit of wasn't that really hard. We're still in the kind of the hard, like living and working at home, all that sort of stuff. But we've got over that shock, that huge shock back in March, April time, and we've survived, and financial services survived and supported people really well. 160,000 people in Scotland should be proud of what they've done over the past 9 months, frankly. The way that they have supported and worked and kept the system going and kept the world going. I think the next 6 months is about kind of saying, right, now we really have to think about what's next. And I think it's to Helen's point, we're not going back to where we were. And I think that's a good thing that we're not going to go back to where we were. I think there's so much around that humanity, that kind of understanding of people as individuals that we've probably seen on calls like this more than we ever have before. I think we need to kind of keep that. So I think the next 6 months is about planning what the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years looks like in Scotland and financial services. I think there's a huge opportunity to reimagine what we're doing. We've proven the technology works. Gary's point, the technology works. So this isn't a question of technology. The technology, whether it's cloud, whether it's digital, whether it's the data-driven data science, it's there, it works. Scotland's got the people who can kind of take advantage of it. And now's the time to reimagine financial services and reimagine what it looks like to be one of the leading financial services centres of the world. That's what Scotland could and should be.
You're also positive. I love it. Helen, what about you? What else would you add to that for the next 6 months for financial services?
I think I would echo both what Gary and Stuart said. I think the only addition that I would say is I really hope that we've learned a lot collectively over the last 9 months. Yes, there's been highs and lows involved in it. I think everybody would reflect and probably come up with that same conclusion. But I think going forward, the next 6 months, I really hope that Stuart says we can plan for the future and what Scotland can become within the FS context. But I really hope that those FS organisations are truly inclusive and are truly hubs of collaboration, right? We've got a track record with the FS organisations that are currently here. So how can we add to that? How can we make sure that what we're doing within those organisations is truly inclusive and does factor in the people that want to be, as Gary said, face to face, the people that want to be flexible and have enabled from home and have the technology that enables them to work for their own lifestyle and strike the balance. So I hope we take the challenges that we've gone through and that we're still continuing to face. But in the next 6 months, it would be great to think that actually we take the best of what we've learned and go forward with it rather than shelve it. And I'm really confident that actually we will. I think it is going to have made a huge seismic change for us for the better. We will be more inclusive, hopefully, going forward.
Brilliant. Well, we'll leave it there for today. Stuart Chalmers, Gary Taylor, and of course, Helen Lindsay. Thank you all very much for joining us on this Herald webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.